Dear reader, I am the man with the cube, and I would like to share with you a fascinating concept known as the constellations of the cube. The cube is an artifact of great mystery and power, but it is not easily deciphered. It is said that the dimensions of the cube are connected to the patterns found in the natural world, and this is where the constellations of the cube come into play. Think of the cube as a star in the night sky, and the patterns in the natural world as constellations. Just as stars align to create constellations, the dimensions of the cube align with certain patterns in the world around us. These alignments create a sort of map that can guide those seeking the knowledge and power of the cube. Deciphering the constellations of the cube is no easy task. It requires a sharp eye and a deep understanding of the natural world to see the connections between the cube and the patterns around us. But for those who can unlock the secrets of the constellations, the rewards are great. As you journey with Anna and Edward on their quest for the cube, keep an eye out for the patterns in the world around them. They may hold the key to unlocking the cube's secrets and changing the course of their world, and perhaps even yours, forever. Best regards, the man with the cube.
As the duo approached the man with the cube, they noticed that he was busy creating something in the distance. As they got closer, they saw that he was creating a constellation of the cube, floating in the air, manipulating an additional cube. Anna and Edward were amazed by the beauty of each cube, yet they couldn't help but ask the man with the cube about how he created the constellation of the cube. He smiled and said,
"This is an example of a constellation of the cube. It is created by using multiple cubes that are placed together through an orbital force."
The duo looked at each other, not quite understanding what the man with the cube meant. He continued,
Think of it as the beginning a branch on a bush that grows and evolves over time. Each additional cube grows the landscape of cubes, creating a unique and beautiful pattern.
Anna and Edward still looked puzzled, so the man with the cube began to break it down further.
An anchoring cube is like a black hole in the center of the galaxy. It remains stationary while the additional cube falls into orbit around it. The landscape of cubes develops through additional cubes being placed in specific alignments to constellations to create a secondary structure within a landscape of cubes.
Edward spoke up.
But how do you know where to place each additional cube?
The man with the cube smiled and replied,
It's all about understanding the landscape of cubes surrounding the anchoring cube within a structure called the constellation of the cube. Once you understand that, you can begin to create your own secondary structures.
Anna and Edward were fascinated by this new concept and asked the man with the cube to teach them more. He went on to explain the intricacies of creating a constellation of the cube. Anna and Edward listened intently, but they often needed terms like anchoring cube and additional cube defined by the man with the cube. He was patient and happy to explain further, and soon enough, they were all working together to create each their own constellations of the cube. As the duo marveled at their creations, the man with the cube smiled and said,
You see, it's all about understanding the underlying structure of the universe and finding creative ways to interact with it. With the invention of structural growth from constellations of the cube, we can create something truly beautiful and unique.
Anna asks the question of the man with the cube.
What causes the cubes to interact to form a constellation of the cube within a landscape of cubes?
The man with the cube smiles at Anna's question and begins to explain.
It's not about a specific force or gravity, but rather about the alignment and positioning of the cubes. Each cube, when placed in the intended position, they interact with one another, and structural growth is designed.
He continues.
Think of it like a dance, where each cube has its own rhythm and movement. When the cubes are within a constellation, they can draw together in harmony and create something greater than themselves, just like how dancers in a performance can create a beautiful display of movement and expression.
Anna nods, intrigued by the explanation. The man with the cube goes on to say,
Anchoring cubes play a crucial role in this process as well. They provide a stable foundation for the constellation to interact with, kind of like the lead dancer in a dance troupe who sets the tempo and rhythm for the others to follow.
The duo listens attentively as the man with the cube further explains the concept of constellations of the cube and how they can be formed. They learn about the different types of constellations of the cube, such as the variable number of cubes within a constellation of the cube and the different symmetries of each unique constellation of the cube. By the end of the lesson, the duo is filled with a newfound appreciation for the intricate and beautiful processes that govern the universe. They thank the man with the cube for his teachings and look forward to putting their newfound knowledge into practice. As they wandered through the sprawling landscape cubes superimposed over the Earth's vibrant flowers, Anna couldn't help but ponder the nature of the flowers emerging from the ground and the structures in the landscape of cubes.
What are these structures made of? Constellations of cubes,
she mused. Edward, always the inventive one, chimed in.
What if these structures are connected to the landscape and the flowers in a fundamental way? What if there's some kind of structural growth potential of the cube, and the dimensions of the constellations of the cube are linked to the patterns in the natural world?
The duo's conversation was interrupted by a sudden burst of light, emanating from a specific anchoring cube. The man with the cube had arrived, his face alight with excitement.
My friends, you are onto something,
he exclaimed.
The structural growth from constellations of the cube can be applied not just to create beautiful constellations, but to massively expand the cube landscape itself.
The man with the cube proceeded to activate the anchoring cube, and the landscape began to grow and shift before their eyes. With each additional cube, new structures and patterns emerged, more complex and beautiful than anything they had seen before. Anna felt a deep sense of purpose stirring within her.
We must understand these structures made of constellations, yet are within the landscape,
she declared. With that, the man with the cube led them deeper into the landscape, ready to uncover the secrets of the structures and the fundamental link between the natural world and the power of the cube. Chapter 8. Creating a Constellation of the Cube. Excitement filled the air as Anna and Edward stood in front of a landscape of cubes. The man with the cube stood by their side, watching with anticipation as the duo prepared to create their own constellations of the cube. Edward picked up an additional cube and turned to Anna.
I think we should start with a simple pattern and build from there,
he suggested. Anna nodded in agreement, eager to get started. The duo began to experiment, placing the additional cube in various positions around the anchoring cube. They soon discovered that by aligning the additional cube with the orbital of the anchoring cube, force would hold them together. They repeated this process several times, creating a simple but elegant constellation of the cube. The man with the cube watched with interest as Anna and Edward continued to experiment, adding more cubes to the pattern, and adjusting their positions to create new shapes and symmetries. He could see the excitement in their eyes as they discovered the limited possibilities of constellations of the cube. As the duo worked, the man with the cube offered guidance and advice.
Remember to keep the overall structure in mind,
he reminded them.
Each additional cube should be placed with intention, contributing to the overall pattern and enhancing the beauty of the constellation.
With the man with the cube's help, Anna and Edward continued to refine their constellation, adding more cubes, and adjusting their additions until they were satisfied with the final design. They stepped back to admire their creation, marveling at the intricate orbiting cubes that they had created. The man with the cube smiled.
You have created something truly beautiful, but remember, this is just the beginning. With the structural growth potential of the cube, you can continue to add to your constellation and create something even more complex and stunning.
Anna and Edward nodded, excited to continue their exploration of constellations of the cube. They thanked the man with the cube for his guidance and set off to create even more intricate and beautiful structures in the cube landscape. As they worked, They began to understand the deep connection between the natural world and the power of the cube. They realized that the patterns and symmetries of the cube landscape were not random but were governed by a set of fundamental laws and principles. With this knowledge, they continued to experiment, creating new constellations, and exploring the potential of the structural growth from constellations of the cube. They knew that their work was just beginning and that there were endless possibilities for exploration and discovery in the beautiful and mysterious world of the cube. Chapter 9. The Power of Structural Growth. Edward stood at the edge of the man with the cube's landscape, his mind racing with excitement. He turned to Anna, who was standing beside him, and said,
"Let's apply the invention of structural growth from constellations of the cube on this landscape. Imagine the possibilities, Anna. We could create something truly remarkable."
Anna nodded, her eyes shining with anticipation. She had learned the method of structural growth from the man with the cube, and she was eager to put it into action. They both knew that this was a chance to do something truly extraordinary, to create through design and development. The process of structural growth from constellations of the cube was simple but powerful. It involved identifying and anchoring cube within a landscape of cubes, adding additional cubes to the anchoring cube through the use of the anchoring cube's orbitals, and holding the resulting structures together by the standardized cube's orbitals, taking on a wide range of symmetries within constellations of the cube. As Anna and Edward began the process, they were amazed at how quickly the structures grew and evolved. They could see the cube orbitals working their magic, connecting the cubes together and forming intricate patterns and designs. They continued to place more additional cubes to the constellations, each new placement bringing a new bit of beauty to the structures. Edward watched as the secondary structures grew taller and more intricate, their shapes twisting and turning like flowers reaching for the sun. The landscape of cubes was like the earth, and the secondary structures were like the flowers that bloomed on its surface. The beauty of it all was overwhelming, and both felt a deep sense of awe and wonder. As they worked, the man with the cube watched from a distance, smiling with satisfaction. He knew that his invention had the power to change the world, and he was pleased to see Anna and Edward putting it to good use. When they were finished, he walked over to them and handed them each a golden cube.
"These cubes will generate a random landscape of cubes,"
he said.
"Use them well and give the world a chance to design."
Anna and Edward thanked him and took the cubes, feeling a sense of gratitude and responsibility. They knew that they had been given a gift, and they were determined to use it to make a difference in the world. They looked at each other, their eyes shining with excitement, and set off into the unknown, ready to create something truly remarkable. Chapter 10. Edward's Epiphany. As the duo continued their journey with the man within the cube, Edward couldn't help but ponder the possibilities of the invention they had uncovered. He had always been fascinated by the intricacies of computer circuitry. And the signaling pathways from constellations of the cube opened up a whole new realm of possibilities. Suddenly, Edward's mind was flooded with a realization.
The logic gates are formed by applying resolved binary information in all additional cubes of each anchoring cube where the gate exists, allowing the equation of constellations to logic gates.
He exclaimed. Anna and the man within the cube looked at Edward in surprise.
What do you mean?
Anna asked, curious to hear more. Edward took a deep breath and began to explain.
The constellations of the cube can be translated into binary information, right? Well, that binary information can be used to create logic gates, which are essential components in computer circuitry. But the really fascinating thing is that the logic gates are formed by applying resolved binary information in all additional cubes of each anchoring cube where the gate exists.
Anna and the man within the cube listened intently as Edward continued to explain.
This means that the constellations of the cube can be used to create complex logic gates, which can in turn be used to build advanced computer circuitry. Imagine what we could do with this kind of technology.
Anna's eyes widened as she began to grasp the possibilities.
We could build machines that are more intelligent than anything we've ever seen before.
Indeed, this invention has the potential to revolutionize the world as we know it. But we must be careful with how we use it.
Yes, we must be responsible with this power. But I have no doubt that we can use it to create incredible things, things that will change the course of history.
And with that, the duo continued on their quest, their minds buzzing with ideas and possibilities. They knew that the invention they had uncovered was only the beginning, and that the future held limitless potential. Chapter 11. Mounting logic gates within a landscape of cubes generating a signaling pathway.
Let's try something new,
said Anna.
Let's mount a logic gate within one of these constellations of the cube.
Edward's eyes lit up with excitement.
That's a great idea. We could create a whole new level of functionality.
They set to work, examining the cube landscape, and identified an anchoring cube to house the gate. After some deliberation, they chose a cube near the center of the cube landscape, with a few orbitals available for use while also being within the constellation of the cube. The duo began by identifying the type of basic logic gate they wanted to mount. Anna and Edward went over the concept of gates together, how they could receive input signals and produce output signals based on logic. Edward decided the target anchoring cube of the constellation of the cube, saying,
"Let's mount a gate within this one."
They each selected an additional cube in the constellation to serve as the input signals for the gate. One would represent a 1 signal, and the other a 0 signal. They carefully placed the cubes in orbit around the anchoring cube and watched as the cube orbitals worked their magic, forming the necessary connections between the cubes. As the structures grew and evolved through Anna and Edward's placements, the duo kept a close eye on the development of the signaling pathway. They used the cube orbitals to establish the correct connections within the constellation of the cube and had faith that the gate would function. Finally, many gates were mounted within the anchoring cube of the constellations of the cube, comprising the secondary structures within the landscape of cubes, ready to receive input signals and produce output signals based on logic. Anna and Edward stood back and looked at the constellations of the cube, each mounted with a gate. They were excited to see how it would work within the larger landscape of cubes. They began by sending a 1 signal to one of the input cubes of the gate. They watched as the signal traveled through the additional cube of the chosen constellation of the cube in the cube landscape, through the anchoring cube's gate, and out the other side.
Amazing!
Exclaimed Edward.
It's working perfectly.
Anna and Edward continued to experiment with different combinations of input signals, watching as the signals traveled through the mounted gate and out into the surrounding landscape of cubes. They were amazed at how quickly and easily the signaling pathways were generated. They soon realized the potential of their invention. By mounting logic gates within constellations of the cube, they could create complex signaling pathways that could be used for a wide range of purposes.